In this chapter, we're going to talk about some break-even topics, including a sales mix, finding that break-even point and profitability with limited resources, as well as looking at our operating leverage. Another thing to consider is our sales mix, or especially our break-even, considering our sales mix, because typically a company sells more than one product, so we need to consider that sales mix when looking at break-even points. When we want to find break-even point when we have multiple products, the first step is to find the sales mix. This is looking at what total amount of sales each product contributes to the overall sales. To find that, you would take your units sold and divide by the per product and divide that by your total units sold. So for product A, we would take that 8,000 units sold, divide that by 10,000, which is my combined units sold, to get 80%. Product B, we would do the same thing. Our units sold for product B is 2,000. We divide that by our 10,000 to get a sales mix of 20% for product B. Now, once we have that sales mix percentage, we will find what we're going to make into a new product. In this example, they call this product E. What we want to do is find that selling price, variable price, and contribution margin of our new product, our product E. To do that, we would take each piece of product A and multiply it by our sales mix, or 80%. So for our sales of product A, we take $90, which is our selling price, and multiply it by that 80%. Then we'll do that for product B as well. We take a look at the sales price of $140 and multiply that by 20%. This will give us our selling price of product E, or our new product. Then we'll do that for our variable costs, and then finally we can do that for our contribution margin. And now that we've found a contribution margin of our new product, or our combined product, product E, we can do our break-even calculation. So we take our fixed costs and divide that by our unit contribution margin of our new product, product E, and it tells us that we need to sell 8,000 units to break even. So now that we know we need to sell 8,000 units of this new product, product E, now we have to determine how much of each product we need to sell of product A and product B. To get that, we would just use that sales mix percentage again. So for product A, our sales mix percentage was 80%. We would take our 8,000 units times that 80% to know that we need to sell 6,400 units of product A. We do the same thing for product B. We take that 8,000 units we need to break even, times that by our sales mix percentage for product B, and we know that we need to sell 1,600 units of product B in order to break even. There are just a couple of other equations to know for this chapter. The first equation is the operating leverage, and this is the relationship between the contribution margin and income from operations. What this does is tells you how much impact a change in sales can have on your change in income. So once we find the operating leverage, we can multiply that by our change in sales to get the percentage change in net income. To find that operating leverage, we take our contribution margin and divide that by our income from operations. This will give us a number like a 4 or 5. We multiply that by our percentage change in sales, which would give us our percentage change in income. Let's look at an example of that. Again, to get our operating leverage, we take our contribution margin and divide that by our income from operations. So looking at this Jones company, our contribution margin would be $100,000. Our income is $20,000. Therefore, our operating leverage is 5. Now that we know our operating leverage is 5 for Jones & Company, we can use this operating leverage to determine what kind of change in income we would have for a change in sales. For example, if we know that our sales are going to increase by 10%, what impact would that have on our income? What we would do is take our operating leverage of 5, multiply that by our 10%, and it would tell us that our income would increase by 50%. Limited resources refer to products that share one particular resource. Typically, this resource is limited because we're making multiple products and we only have so much of this resource. To make sure we're maximizing our income, we look at which product is making the most profit based on this resource. To do this, we're first going to calculate our contribution margin per unit. Remember, contribution margin is sales minus those variable expenses. We do this on a per unit basis, and we divide that by our limited resource requirement per unit. So we want to look at how much we're using that resource for each unit we're making. And this will tell us a contribution margin per unit based on that limited resource. We will produce the highest contribution margin per unit of that limited resource first until it meets demand. And then we will go on to the next product that produces the highest contribution margin per limited resource. To show you an example of this, we'll look at DVD players and TVs. First, we calculate that contribution margin per unit. You'll notice the DVD player's contribution margin per unit is lower, but the limited resource is machine hours for both of these products. We'll take the hours required per product and divide that to find the contribution margin per unit of the limited resource. Then you'll notice when we look based on this limited resource, those DVD players are actually have a much higher contribution margin, and those should be made first. And as a quick review, we're going to go over break-even point in units and in dollars. Make sure we remember these equations. If we are trying to determine our break-even in units, you would use units. If you wanted to determine break-even in dollars, you're going to use that ratio. And to review our target net income, remember most companies don't want to break even. They want to make some money. So we're going to use those same equations we just reviewed, but we're also going to add that target net income to our fixed cost to make sure we cover not only our fixed cost, but the profit that we want to make. And a quick review, lastly, of the margin of safety. Remember, margin of safety tells you how much you are over that break-even point. And we can look at that in a dollar figure or as a percentage.